Hi, Grandma here reading Tirzah, chapter 12, and it's called War. In the last chapter, Tirzah and her brother Ram had seen flashing like metal shields surrounding their camp, and they think that it's Bedouins, not Egyptians. Ram and Tirzah reached the camp safely. Runners sent to confirm the news returned quickly. They reported that a war party of Amalekites were indeed camped on the ridges near the water. Tirzah felt a chill run down her back. She and Ram had been right under the noses of the Amalekites. They had not attacked them, probably hoping to surprise a sleeping camp later. People were hurrying in all directions, and with the start, Tirzah remembered the Amalekites were coming. Quickly, she ran to help her mother and Jerioth. For once in her life, Sari cooperated, moving as fast as her short legs would go on the rough, steep path to higher ground. Turning to look behind her, Tirzah saw old Hannah leaning heavily on Mary's shoulder. Ahead of her, Oren swung along on his crutch as easily as the goats he drove before him. She needn't worry about him. It was Ram and her father that worried her. They had gone back to help evacuate the camp. For some, it was already too late. The Amalekites attacked the small group of stragglers, mostly elderly and sick, who had stopped to camp on the other side of the water. Grief filled Tirzah's heart as word of the attack came. At dawn, the men formed their battle lines. Ram and her father, though skilled with the sling, carried throwing spears called javelins. Their faces were grim and determined. Man after man followed the clan leaders. Tirzah saw the men of Dan raise their prized sickle-shaped swords as they passed where the woman stood to watch them go by. The sharp swords were valued because there were so few of them. If the Amalekites were well armed, how would the men of Israel stand before them? And if they lost, what then? It would be the end of them all. She knew that the Amalekites would save alive only those who suited them as slaves. The women were already running back to the temporary camp, and Tirzah fled with them. All day, the sounds of battle shouts and clashes filled the air like a roaring wave that rose and fell to return again and again. Half a dozen times, Ram and Abishur brought wounded men back to the shelter of the tents the women had set up among the high rocks. Tirzah shuddered at the sight of the blood-soaked men, some with pieces of javelins sticking from their bodies like giant splinters. Her mother, Jerioth, and the women without nursing children worked steadily washing and binding wounds. Old Hannah, with her store of herbs, was kept busy distributing and mixing her medicines. "Tirzah here," Jerioth called as she covered the young man on the ground before her with the soft goat skin. The boy's face, he could not have been much older than Ram, Tirzah thought, was white, his eyes closed. Jerioth spoke softly. "Tell Hannah we have need of something for pain. We've done all we can here." Tirzah nodded, the great lump in her throat preventing her from speaking. She'd seen the blood-reddened covering on the boy's chest. He was so young. Would he die? Quickly, she hurried to the far end of the camp where Hannah knelt by a steaming pot. On her way back with the small bowl of herbs, Tirzah saw Ram. His black hair was covered with dust, his face streaked where the sweat had run down his cheeks. This time it was an older man who slumped heavily against Ram's shoulder. Tirzah saw him hand over his burden to the strong arms of the women who came to assist him. For a minute, Ram paused to wipe his forehead before he caught up with her. "Is that water?" Ram's voice was hoarse. "I'm as parched as dried corn." Tirzah shook her head. "Sorry, it's medicine for the wounded, but I'll get you some water." Ram walked with her to where Jerioth was cleaning blood from a man's deeply gashed forehead. Putting down the bowl of herbs, Tirzah motioned Ram toward a large stone. "Sit while I fetch water." Ram nodded. "For a moment, but hurry, I have to go back." Tirzah was quick, and Ram drank thirstily. "Ah, that helps, Tiz." "How's the battle going?" Tirzah asked, half afraid to hear his answer. Ram stood up. "Oh, haven't you heard?" she asked. "Moses stands on the hill before Yahweh with his arms uplifted, and so long as he holds up his hands, our men press forward to victory. When he grows tired and lowers his arms, our men are forced to retreat before the Amalekites. Right now, Aaron and Hur have put a stone beneath him to sit on, and they are holding his hands up." Tirzah was excited. "Yahweh is helping us fight," she said, her voice full of wonder. "Yes, and my job is waiting. See you, Tiz." Ram hurried off, and Tirzah watched him go. Quickly, she picked up the empty bowl and went back to help. By sunset, the battle was over. Joshua and the men of Israel raised a cry of victory. The Amalekites, sorely beaten, fled. Tired to the bone, every muscle aching, Ram threw himself down by the campfire. Abishur, his tunic covered with dried blood and dust, sat down beside him. "I'll sit here a while until my legs find out that they're still attached," Abishur said, rubbing his hands with ash to clean them. "A bowl of hot broth is what you need," Jerioth's voice soothed as she stirred the steaming contents in her cooking pot. Tirzah fetched bowls and held them for Jerioth to fill. From the first, Tirzah had liked her. More and more, her mother and all of them had come to depend on Jerioth's help. Dreamily, Tirzah served the boys as Jerioth hummed the song Tirzah had come to love. "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously." It had been a day to remember. Looking at Abishur's stained clothes, Tirzah thought of the wounded. Tears filled her eyes, and turning away, she wiped them from the back of her hand. Her father and Moled were coming. As they came near, Moled said, "We fought well today, Jerahiel. Sleep well tonight." "And you," her father replied, his voice hoarse with tiredness. "Yahweh is good to his people." Both men went immediately to the tents. One of the twins came and sat beside her. She knew it was Benj when she saw the scar on his right cheek, faded now to a small line paler than the rest of his skin. "Here," he said, holding out his hand. On his palm was the smallest nest Tirzah had ever seen. In its center lay 3 tiny blue eggs. "The mother was killed by a stray slingshot. I found the nest under a thorn bush." Carefully, Tirzah took the little nest. "They will never hatch," she said sadly, "but how perfect the nest is." She turned it around in her hands, admiring the intricate woven twigs and thorns. "What a wonder that a bird can make such a thing," she thought aloud. Gently, she placed the nest in Benj's hand. "Will you put it back in the thorn bush? I suppose some other bird will use it before the season is past." Benj's face was thoughtful. "I'll take it back in the morning if you like." Instantly, Tirzah saw her mistake. He had meant it as a gift to her, and she had given it back. She felt her face flush. Before she could think, Benj had risen abruptly and left, calling good night behind him. With a start, Abishur sat up. Groggily, he stared at Tirzah. "Must go home, late," he mumbled, struggling to his feet. He stumbled blindly over Ram and came dangerously close to the campfire. Tirzah sprang to her feet to pull him away to safety. He was half asleep on his feet. With her arm and shoulder supporting him, Tirzah guided Abishur on the path to his father's tent. "Tired," Abishur muttered, leaning heavily on her arm. "Just want to lie down." "Hang on, we're almost there," Tirzah encouraged as they neared the tent. Abishur's mother ran toward them. "It's all right, Aunt Rebecca. He's just tired out and fell asleep by our campfire." "Praise be to Yahweh," her aunt called, reaching out for Abishur. Like a child, he let her lead him. "I'll send someone to see you back, Tirzah, just as soon as I get Abishur to the tent." "Oh, I'll be fine," Tirzah assured her. "I'll go now and see you tomorrow. Good night." Before her aunt could object, she turned quickly toward her own campfire. On the ground near it, Ram slept like a stone. A night wind blew mournfully up from the empty battle plain, making Tirzah pull her blanket close. The fire burned low, and Tirzah's eyes were heavy with sleep. Above her, the glory cloud shone softly. Yahweh had saved them. Well, that was interesting. I don't recall I ever heard that part of the story. I mean, I'm sure that it happened. Anyway, the next chapter is called Strangers. And I imagine they run across a group of wanderers, people who had left their home. Who knows? Well, we'll see in the next chapter. Bye-bye.